Well, hello, friends, and welcome to a very special Ask Xact. Today's episode is a collaboration between Ask Xact and Truetone, and it involves us going on a field trip to JD Simo's House of Grief studio to talk about his involvement in Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. To cut to the chase, he played the majority of the guitar work that you'll hear throughout the film. We'll also talk about his new solo record and his gear. I hope you enjoy. Well, hello, friends. Today we are in JD Simo's home. He's our friend and yours. We're back again. This is actually, I think, our fourth episode together. And today we are really excited because JD played, I think, the majority of the guitar work on the new Elvis biopic by Baz Luhrmann and starring Austin Butler.
Indeed.
And of course, Tom Hanks as the fat-suited Colonel Tom Parker.
Yes, the Carney.
The Carney.
The mastermind.
So today we're going to talk about the Elvis movie and how you got involved in it. Mm-hmm. And also we're going to talk about you're finishing up a new record right now, and you're going to start a tour with with Tab Benoit and the Dirty Dozen Brass Band. And also you've got an updated pedal board, and you've got this Danocaster guitar. So we've got that's what we're going to cover today. So I just want to dive in and say, what does Elvis mean to you?
Well, as you know, being, as we've discussed many times, best man at my wedding, the reason I moved to Nashville, this man, when I was a little boy, that's the reason I started playing guitar, was seeing Elvis on television. I was 4. And I saw the comeback special on television, a replay of it, which I'm assuming was probably for his birthday or the anniversary of his death or something. And it was the mixture of like that and being exposed to the, sort of Saturday Night Live, Blues Brothers and all that kind of stuff. Like that was sort of my way into music, Booker T and the MGs and stuff from the Blues Brother movie as well. But seeing Elvis on television is really what did it. And then, of course, figuring out that that's Scotty Moore and James Burton later, and then way later finding out about Reggie Young and Tommy Tedesco and, the other guys that contributed, Hank Garland and Grady Martin and, But what it means, it's just the earliest influence for me,
What was it about it that pulled you in?
I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's probably what billions of people love about Elvis. I mean, he just was, he's Coca-Cola. He's the New York Yankees. He's Mickey Mouse, like he's, the Beatles, it's like there's only so many things in the history of modern times, at least, that are that iconic and that world renowned. And I don't think there is a way to totally kind of encapsulate it, because that's what makes all those things so uniquely special, but he definitely, he's at that, I for me, it was just amazing looking, interesting, all the same things that anyone else would, and especially as a young child, I think that you're taken with, you don't really know why you're being drawn in when you're 4 years old, now being the father of a 3.5-year-old, like it's just, which surprisingly, she's very taken with Elvis now as well. So it's like I get to see it through her eyes, and it's like, whoa, okay.
I think that in one of our past interviews with Reggie Young, and he mentioned Elvis, and that he was not in any way really he was a fan of Elvis in the 50s, but
Sure.
then when they had the sessions that would end up being Elvis in Memphis with Suspicious Minds and all those tunes, that he really had very low expectations, and yet when Elvis came in the room, it was like there was a presence. And it was just that even though he wasn't even a fan at that point, that he was just so taken aback, and he had such a charisma to him.
Yeah. Which Reggie did too. God
Yeah.
rest his soul.
Yeah. So how did you get involved with the film?
I was on tour in the summer of 2018, and my friend Dave Cobb called me. We were in Albuquerque on our way home. We were deadheading home, as they say, in the business from the last show, which I think was in Los Angeles or something. And I've known Dave since probably 2012 or something like that, but we'd never worked together. We'd been friends, hung out, geeked out, and all that, but I'd never worked on anything with him. And in the interim, he became Dave Cobb, this incredible Grammy Award-winning producer, and sort of has ushered in this new Nashville sound with the likes of producing Chris Stapleton and Jason Isbell and Sturgill Simpson and the Secret Sisters, and doing the Star Is Born soundtrack and all the many other things too. And so he called me, and I was like, why is Dave calling me? And so I picked the phone up, and I say, hey, what's going on? And he's like, hey, man, are you going to be home this weekend? And I, under normal circumstances, pre-COVID, I wasn't much for years. I mean, we were doing 200. Pre-COVID, it was 200 plus every year from 2015 onward. But I was on the way. I was like, man, I'm on the way home. I'll be home, tomorrow. What's up? And he's like, well, I'm working on this pretty big project. It's an Elvis movie. And I'd like you to come in and play guitar. I'd like you to do the Scotty Moore stuff and, whatever else we need. And I said, sure, I'd love to, So we went in, and this is before Austin was even cast. And Tom Hanks was cast at that point. But that was it. And so I showed up at RCAA, which, ironically is where, a lot of this stuff was cut, either there or in RCA's Studio B, of course. And RCAA nowadays, of course, is Dave curates he's the main occupant, if you will, of RCA Studio A. And so I showed up, and Baz Luhrmann was there with his crew of people, and we started sort of getting stuff together, but it was more of a kind of getting to know, sort of feeling things out sort of thing. I think in retrospect, it was probably Dave and Baz getting to know one another, and so on and so forth. Again, I'm a very low rung on a picture of this size. There's many layers to it, and I'm just one tiny little piece of it. But I'm glad going into it, though. I didn't know who Baz Luhrmann was. I didn't, I didn't understand the magnitude of all this at all, and that's, I consider, a blessing in retrospect.
You might have been a little more nervous.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wasn't nervous at all. Like what? Elvis music and 60, 50, 60, I was not intimidated at all with that. But as things progressed, I understood the scope of what was going on here. and then it was like, oh, all right.
Yeah.
This is kind of a big deal.
Yeah. So and of course, being that you are an Elvis fan, and so things start really moving forward.
Yeah, no, we did many groups of sessions, and when I say we, it was myself and my friend Chris Powell on drums, And some of the stuff was with my friend Brian Allen, who myself, Brian, and Chris have worked on lots and lots of projects for Dave these last couple of years, lots of records and stuff. But also in the for the Scotty Moore 50s Bill Black era, Dave asked me for recommendations for Upright for Bill Black. And I was really happy to give him my old friend Joe Fick's number from the Don Kelly Band. And so Joe actually played the Upright, played the Bill Black stuff. And that was really great because that was the first time I'd played with him in 8 years probably since I left Don's band. And also going back 15 years or so, he actually played Bill Black in Walk the Line. If you watch the Johnny Cash biopic, Joe actually plays Bill Black in that movie. He's in several scenes. And so that was really funny. And Baz, I think, liked that after the fact. When I explained to him that, because, of course, Joe wasn't going to go up to Baz Luhrmann and tell him that. Yeah. But, as a side, I was like, he was in. He was like, really? It was cool. So,
what was your impression of Baz?
He's a presence. He's in the room. He's very impressive. He's very well spoken. He's very good looking. He's very striking in the way that he presents himself, and not in an over showy kind of way. He just has this, I guess I would, like an old school movie star would, I suppose. Like if Cary Grant walked in the room or something. He has this presence about him. And he was very, all the times I was around, which he was not present for all the sessions. He was present for some of them. But he was very concerned with authenticity. He was very concerned with things being, very intricately correct. But also he was very, and especially after Austin was cast, and we did a round of sessions with Austin, which are the performances in the film for the Louisiana Hayride and the Milton Berle show and all the music that was cut for those scenes. That's the first time Austin had ever been in a recording studio. Wow. And he did an amazing job. And he had only just been cast, and it's like, what a responsibility. And he was just right in to cut stuff with us, and he was great. And anyway, what I was going to say is Baz, to him specifically, but to all of us, Baz was very, he was about trying to capture an energy or a vibe and not having it be an impersonation. Whether, especially in Austin's case, but also in our case. He was like, I want it to be authentically correct, but I don't want you to completely mimic every part of it, because I want you to interpret what this person would play, right.
And have energy and not just be mimicry.
Exactly. And he was very keen on that. And he noticed too, if I did multiple takes in a row or something and I was tending to do something the same way, he would notice, and he would be like, make sure to vary it some, he was great to work with.
So were most of the tracks, because you're cutting these tracks before the movie is shot, mm-hmm. and were most of these live?
Oh yeah, all of them. Yeah, every one of them was live to tape.
And so then when they're filming, they're using playback.
Correct.
And so they're playing, and so you've got to have a lot of energy in those recordings so that it translates onto film.
Yeah.
And then also those guys have to pantomime to what you played too.
Right. Which I can't even, I'm terrible at, I can learn stuff exact Xact knows me very well, but still I vary a lot, which is what makes me a good session musician, because I will vary. Like if left to my own devices, I will play something completely different every time. And yeah, I mean, I can't even begin to think the challenge of what they had, the actors.
Yeah.
But there's one instance where we didn't cut something before they shot, and it was because of COVID restrictions, where there's like a rehearsal scene in Las Vegas where Elvis is sort of talking the sort of jumpsuit era band, James Burton and Ronnie Tutt and, all them, through what he's wanting them to do on That's All Right Mama or CC Rider, I forget. And they cut it, they filmed it, but we hadn't cut playback to it. And so we had to cut playback after the fact. Ooh. And that was a whole day of really hard work on our part. It's really, really hard when you don't have a grid and there's not things were coming in and out at odd times, and it's like the only way that we could do it was to completely chart this entire thing out. And then we had to execute it just right, because essentially we're playing to what they've done, and it's a lot harder to do it that way.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But that's the only time that happened that I was a part of, at least. So, thankfully, I only had to go through it once.
Yeah. So you mentioned before that, of course, you had to, you had to play the parts that were originally done, of course, by Scotty Moore and Grady Martin and Hank Garland and Reggie Young and James Burton and Tommy Tedesco and all these guys. So, did you just study them, and then of course thinking about tones and things like that? Let's just start with Scotty. So so did you learn the parts and then y'all chose gear to go with it?
Yeah, I was given a roadmap before each session of like what Baz was wanting to get, so I'd be able to do my homework. And luckily, all that stuff was sort of really ingrained in me anyway, so it wasn't a big stretch. And yeah, with Scotty, we started at the very beginning, that first session, where we went to Carter's and got basically every big-bodied Gibson they had. I brought my ES5, but it was clearly too dark for what we were needing. So we auditioned a whole host of guitars, and we ended up picking out this L5 that was, it was a 50s L5 that it just sounded the best, the most like Scotty. And amplifier-wise, it was difficult because for a minute I was like, well, maybe I could have a friend reach out to Deke Dickerson, or
because he has Scotty's old amp.
Or I have another friend actually up in New York who actually owns the amp, a collector up there who owns Scotty's the actual. Yeah, and but it was clear to me that it was just not going to be worth the time or effort, I think, and we needed to get on with it. So we tried a whole bunch of different things, and we ended up using this old Rickenbacker amp that Dave owns, and it's a 5Y3 early 60s. But again, it was bright enough to do what we needed, because a lot of times with like Tweed Deluxes and stuff like that, you're fighting the darkness. And Scotty's sound was, there are times where it's darker, like on That's All Right Mama, it's darker and so on and so forth. But his stuff has almost a twang to it sometimes. So that was the thing that we were trying to capture, and then using a tube Echoplex in front of it. That ended up being the Scotty, and mic'd with a old RCA 77 going through the old tape machine and the old RCA preamps, mic pre's and stuff. Everything was cut to tape, and everything was very period correct. Like, the Sun stuff was cut 3-track, and
Wow.
it was really fun. It was very authentic.
So the Scotty stuff is a mid-50s L5 with an old Rickenbacker amp. So is that like a 5-watt, or is it?
Yeah.
It was just some type of small amp with like an 8 or a 10 or something like that in it?
Dave still has it.
Yeah, and a tube Echoplex, and that's the Scotty sound.
Yeah, and then over the course of the, like for the Sister Rosetta Thorpe scenes, I used my Jazzmaster that I tuned down. That's out of phase in the middle.
Yeah.
Because a lot of two things. One is she often tuned down a whole step or a step and a half. I think that probably had more to do with where her voice was. I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing, having listened to tons of her. And she early on played archtop guitars, but then had her SG with 3 pickups, which the one position is kind of out of phase. And so again, like trying to, for a minute there, it was like, well, I could play an archtop and do the finger style and play just like her. But it was like, again, trying to capture that thing that seemed identifiably her. It just ended up that my Jazzmaster tuned down out of phase did it. And so used that into that same Rickenbacker amp. That Rickenbacker amp really proved useful because it just really sounded period. It sounded 40s and 50s without being too dark. And the James Burton stuff, Dave has a beautiful 56 Esquire, much like yours, and he also has this 66 or 67 Super Reverb that, I've played through a lot of Supers.
Yeah.
That Super is unlike any I've ever heard, and especially from a recording standpoint, it's got that ping that sounds like Bakersfield. It's got this ping in it. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's that reverb tank or if it's the speakers but that Esquire into that just sounds so dead on.
Yeah.
And so that was probably the easiest, because it was like when it came time for that, it was just like, Dave and I didn't even, it was just like, well, Esquire into that, right? So
I'm curious, did besides Sister Rosetta Tharpe, were there other guitarists other artists that you played the parts for?
Yeah, there was. Now I don't know because as we're filming this, I actually, embarrassingly enough, have not seen it yet. My work schedule has prevented me from going to multiple situations to be able to see this.
Right.
But so I don't know what has made it into the film. But yeah, we did a Muddy Waters scene. We did a Big Boy Crudup scene. The Big Boy Crudup scene was really difficult because he tuned his guitar in a really odd fashion. I had to do a fair amount of research. Embarrassingly enough, I've forgotten most of it now. But it's similar to like Albert Collins, where it was like
it's an open minor chord.
It's an open minor chord, and getting the fingering of the original "That's All Right, Mama" to feel right was really hard. That was one of the things that was most difficult, and I labored with that for a good minute because I was really trying to get it right. And like I say, I don't know if it made it in, but that was that. And then there was 60s related stuff that I know was Tommy Tedesco. So again, that was, the Telecaster into the Super, to the best of my recollection. Same thing with with Reggie, with the stuff that was Reggie Young. But yeah, there was a whole bunch of stuff. But the most fun for me was either the Scotty stuff in particular or the Sister Rosetta stuff was really fun, because Yola was cast to play Sister Rosetta Thorpe, and she came in for the session, and she's lovely first and foremost, but it's like she was so well prepared and so perfect for the part, and I loved that music so much that it was just so fun to like play it and hear her, next to me singing it. It was just that was a really fun day. So there's a lot of fun days, but that was a fun day.
Did Austin have a vocal coach with him there or
No.
anything? He just kind of went into it. And from interviews that I've seen,
He may have, but I didn't notice or know of there being one there.
Yeah,
I should say.
He even went so far as to really try to cover the different eras where, because Elvis sang differently. He sang very differently in the 50s versus the 60s versus into the 70s. And he was talking about how even his voice and his singing sound came more from like his face, like in the 70s. And you can hear how there's such a different tonality to his voice.
I'm thrilled for the whole thing because as an Elvis fan, I think at least, like you're a little bit older than me. So your generation, certainly my generation, and now the generation or two behind me, I think really since the baby boomers, Elvis's legacy has been tainted by this sort of, very, this caricature, this sort of cartoon thing, the Elvis impersonator, all this cheesy, really, and in most times in very poor taste. And it's like his true kind of genius and, the real, the thing that made him so special has been so shrouded over. And I'm just really grateful that, in the end, so much care was taken. And that's something that Baz, he every once in a while during the sessions, he would have these big, where he wanted to speak to all of us, and be the director.
Yeah.
And which, as a session musician is really not normal, as you know, as a musician. Like in the recording process, you kind of keep your head down and you work really fast. And when the moment is perfect, you don't say anything because you're right on it. So it's like you don't want to spook it,
right?
Because you sort of innately know when you're right on it. But it's like with sort of that meeting with the film, Baz would have these very inspirational talks that were brilliant to listen to. It was like listening to Patton talk or something, it was beautiful, or Winston Churchill or something, it was
casting a beautiful vision.
It was incredible. Yeah. But what was funny is like, multiple times, that would happen. And then we'd have to like sort of start over to get back to the point where we were right on the take that we needed. But he spoke very eloquently and very impassioned about wanting to right the wrongs that have been paid him and his legacy since he passed away.
Yeah.
And that was very that bled over into every aspect that at least I was privy to, which again is a very small fact. I mean, the more time went on, the more important people in the back of the room that I had no idea who they were, but it was clear that they were incredibly important. Like it was like, okay, this is a big deal. I get it.
Handful of favorite Elvis tunes.
I think his version of Blue Moon.
That's my favorite.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. The one off the Sun Session.
Yeah.
It's so eerie and beautiful, and it's been used in soundtracks.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
It's an incredible, very moody performance. Probably that. You'll Never Walk Alone, which is, like he's like, his heart is breaking on that one. And then probably Unchained Melody, right before he passed away, the version from the last special, because it's really sad. I know that plays a part in the movie, and I was happy about that too, because it's just such a, at heart, I think that the thing that as an adult draws me in is there's few things I think that are as compelling as as sadness, the sadness in someone's eyes, the somebody who allows someone that they don't know to see their vulnerability,
to experience it with them.
Yeah, because it's really easy for us to paint on the posterior of that we're fine and that we're got it all together. And
but harnessing that in the song and including the audience with you.
Yeah, it's just, there's nothing more powerful. And, I think that the poignancy of like that performance of Unchained Melody is like, he's a broken man, he's been to the mountaintop and his heart is broken, and all of the success and all of the money and all of the acclaim, all the cars, all the fancy clothes, all the property, all of the acclaim, can't fix a broken heart, and it's just very moving, because that's something that is not part of the American dream, of the thing that I think is so profoundly mythical about Elvis, that he's this sort of Greek mythical figure, but he but he's broken, and he dies a tragic has a tragic end, and in a lot of ways it's like, there's a lot of symbolism there, there's, without getting John Lennon about this, but there's like, I think Bono said at one point, it's like, remember kids, rock stars out there, Jesus died for our sins, and it's like, in a lot of ways, he did his death and his decline and everything, it's like it symbolizes sort of the first, even though Hendrix and Janis Joplin and, there were many others that had already passed away, it's like, Elvis had this full arc, like, the meteoric rise, and then sort of the fall, and then he becomes a movie star, and then it gets really bad, and then he has this incredible comeback, and then it's this slow decline to a tragic end, and it's just, he's the first to go through all those arcs. So, I think it's important to take it all, as one piece, and not the, what the world has kind of done, which is like his last 18 months, has lived in infamy ever since. It's like, man, there's, that's the sad part, it's like, there's this other part that's
there's
like
the
unreal.
glory.
Yeah, exactly. Especially, what made him those first few years. I mean, it's just, where did that come from? It's incredible.
So working with Dave Cobb with the Elvis thing has resulted in other work also. Well, I guess you've been kind of doing other soundtrack work and album work with him. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a wonderful. It's partly that and partly COVID, because previous to COVID, as I mentioned, I was gone. I made 90% of my living from touring. So, that was just the way it was. And so COVID happens and I'm home, and slowly, I start, like many of my friends, reaching out to other friends, other musicians, collaborating on stuff via sending tracks back and forth. This Elvis project is going on, starting and stopping through this whole time period. So then that's going well. So Dave starts, occasionally having me come in to work on other stuff. I met some people through the process of working on that particular project, which led to other projects, which, if you do a good job and you're amiable, one job can lead to 10 more jobs. And it just sort of fingers out like that. It's sort of like tree branches, And so, there were multiple, through that whole, it was just a wonderful amalgam of like doing this with Dave and then starting to work on more stuff with Dave, and then also being home. And as things started to slowly turn, I had, reconnected with people who, in some cases producers or friends of mine who had become music supervisors over the last decade and stuff. And all of a sudden I had time and oh, by the way, I heard you were working on this. And so it's interesting because, basically in 2012-ish, I hopped out of session work to be an artist, and really, with the exception of a handful of times, which were cool times, like working with Jack White, or there were a handful of really cool times, but for the most part, not really doing much of anything other than my own stuff. Now I'm pretty much, back to what I would consider pretty much full time when I'm not on the road and doing my own stuff. It's kind of half and half now.
Yeah.
And it's
just
awesome.
To contrast this, I remember, of course, we've known each other a long time, that, you got so fed up with session work, you didn't want to have anything to do with it because it just had stopped being fun. And part of that is because they were asking you at times to be someone else or to fit into some other mold. And then all of a sudden, then you're a mature artist on your own right. We're talking about now. And all of a sudden, people are asking you to be you, and that's the huge difference. The biggest difference is, without being uncouth or hurtful in any way. It's every single group of, like, whether it's any project with Dave or my friends Brooke Sutton and the group of fellas over at the Wood Brothers studio on the west side that I've worked on a lot of stuff over there with them, or my friend David Kahn in New York. Everything that I'm being called to participate in now is very, very much up my alley, and that is an incredible gift, because I really haven't been asked to work on anything that I wasn't really super into. And that is a very rare thing, and it's something that I'm really grateful for. And it's entirely because, for whatever it's worth, what I've been able to do artistically has informed the types of things that people would want me to be involved in. And so it's pretty amazing. I'm very grateful, because life right now is really, really, really exciting and fun, and the pool of musicians I get to work with and the types of projects are just really fun. And then it's like I go out on the road and do
now I'm doing much shorter runs. I'm doing 10 shows or 12 shows or something, and it's like a little vacation. It's like now I'll go have fun with my friends for a couple of weeks, and and it's very easy-going and natural. Not that it ever wasn't, but it's just like, it's a very different vibe now. It's very...
That's a really rare spot to be able to where you can do a fair amount of studio work and then also have your own artist thing and be able to go out and play shows. To be able to have both those things is really a bit of having your cake and eating it too.
It is. So hopefully I don't screw it up. I'm trying not to, because it's really fun, and it's just on to the next thing and just trying to do the best I can.
So you have Greasy Time that you're still doing, and which you kind of do this feed through together.
It was a beautiful, like every other great thing in my life that is just kind of floated down from the heavens. At the beginning of quarantine, at the behest of my wife. She said, you should, after about a month or so, she was like, everybody's starting to do these live streams. You should just do one, and see if you like it. And I said, that'd be cool, I guess. And I said, and me being the classic overthinker, I was like, all right, well, I'll pick a theme and I'll do a bunch of research and I'll, showcase however many artists, and I'll have photo references and all this stuff, all this above and beyond stuff. But it was really fun, and it was one of many things through the quarantine process that was incredibly fortuitous in the looking at it now. And so I started doing those, and a mutual friend, Mark DiLorenzo, who's a gentleman in Los Angeles, ironically, who had been in the big time movie business for a very long time, working for Fox, was looking to put together a new sort of venture for a streaming platform, and he was watching these things I was doing, which were, especially those first 15 or 20, I mean, there was a lot of views. It was kind of crazy. And so he reached out to me, and he said, I got this idea, and, would you like to be part of it? And I said, absolutely. And so we started developing, and when I say we, it was me and him, going through the nuts and bolts of getting the tech side of it worked out, which was a nightmare to try and get it to be able to be functional in multiple different applications. So like not only from the audience's perspective of like how can they view this and interact and video chat with the artist in question and so on and so forth, and making sure that that was all compatible with any and every type of variant known to man. But then from the artist's standpoint, like I'm nuts, so it's like of course I'm going to figure out how to use my console and upload videos and upload, and learn all of that. But, needless to say, there are many artists that are nowhere capable or interested in doing that. So we had to build out a relatively wide net of tech that could be applicable from the artistic standpoint. And that was a very long process, and it was a very hard process. And I know way more about all of that than I care to know. But it was an incredibly enlightening process, and we put together a really wonderful platform. And in the process of doing so, I reached out, to very dear friends of mine and friends of yours as well, David Grissom, Greg Koch, Ariel Posen, Josh Smith, Kirk Fletcher, a whole host of incredible musicians. And he's, built it into a very beautiful, platform. And when I'm home, I'm very grateful to get to do the show and interact with people all over the world. And it's a whole nother muscle that I didn't know that I had,
Yeah.
and now it's become a really big part of my life. And Mark also has just, he's like one of my best friends, he's a dear, dear man.
It's very interesting how the last couple of years have forced a lot of people to become even more entrepreneurial and how to pick up a lot of other skills that so it's been a time to either grow or die.
Indeed. I think it's really interesting, and I think it's fun. And I'm, as a music fan, I'm a fan of all types of the growing network of content that's out there. And not going out of line here, but I love watching all of your content. You're a friend of mine and a very good friend of mine, so it's kind of strange sometimes if I'm making dinner and there's Zach propped up on my phone, but nonetheless, it's like you make content that I like personally, so it's great.
Thank you. Tell us about the new record. I guess it does it have a name at this point? It's just
we're gonna call it
live.
We're gonna call it Live from the House of Grease, which is my funny moniker here, which is a play on my love of Daptone Records in New York, and theirs is the House of Soul, and I like to eat food that's terrible for me, can't you tell? And so needless to say, those peanut butter and banana sandwiches are awesome. But we got together. We over the course of the pandemic, I finally took sort of engineering and getting down here honed in seriously for the very first time, because I had the time to do it. I've used down here to record stuff in the past, but sort of really tuning it in and seeking the tutelage of friends to help me and so on and so forth, like really it had eluded me. So I finally had the time to do it. And so Adam Abershoff and I would get together down here during lockdown once a week or so, and for over a year, and record. And we recorded 100 and some things. And so it's like in that time, I became a much better engineer and really learned how to get the most out of here. So, yeah, just last week my plan had initially been to document some songs that have been in the live show for the last year or so that aren't on a record yet, and maybe to have like a little vinyl EP or something to come out later in the year. But yeah, we recorded it and I sent it to the label, and they're very into it. So
You played me the tracks, beforehand, and it was nice to hear a real amalgamation of a lot of your different influences and a lot of your different sounds that you've had over the last decade or more, where you have everything from some of the psychedelic, for lack of better terms, Hendrixy kind of influences. You've got like some gated fuzz things. There's the really strong meters influence on a tune. There's some Santa Monica slide guitar influence, and you've always been a beautiful slide player, but you've really taken more into the melodic area, and so that was a really wonderful thing to hear. And there's also a tune that features some of your mandolin playing, and which is kind of a little bit of an homage to Rye. So
absolutely, I've really gotten into all of it, and slide playing has continued to be something I really like mining, and I'm edging more and more because I've always been an improviser, but it's like the sort of call of jazz is becoming stronger and stronger. And I love, and have utmost respect for modern players like Julian Lage and especially obviously Bill Frisell, and so those kind of things. And yeah, I mean, certainly Rye and Blake Mills, and mixed up with everything else. It's it's kind of, I'm really enjoying being in that space right now.
We're back, and we're going to talk gear.
Yeah.
So you're like everyone. Your gear is always evolving, and sometimes you've gone straight to the amp. Sometimes you've had pedals and stuff like that. That kind of comes and goes. So you've got a pedal board again. So let's just start there. So tell us a little bit about what you've got on here, and of course we're very glad that you've got a Truetone CS7 on there.
Yeah, and there was one thing I wanted to, and this is totally unwarranted, they haven't paid me for this or anything. It's not shilling by any means. There's a thing, so I've always been like a big fuzz user, and fuzz, especially old ones, are very finicky about what's around them, what's in line with them. And I can tell you that I've driven our dear friend Barry at Xact Tone Solutions absolutely crazy with, why is this making noise? Why is it shouldn't. And it's because it's a very microphonic, finicky circuit that conventional logic doesn't always fix the problem. And I have multiple times, for my own curiosity, not for anything else, compared multiple power supplies, okay? And the only one that consistently never makes inherent noise is the CS7. I've never had an issue with it. And there is one in particular that is probably the most popular, other than the CS7, that literally just the ground hum in line with my old fuzz face is unusable.
Wow.
For whatever reason.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going on there.
Well, we're just
that is absolutely not. That is my own. Always trying to make sure that everything is as good as it can be. And I could talk to you for hours about the finicky thing about having fuzz. Like, there's certain, without getting too deep down the rabbit trail, as you say, fuzzes don't like certain types of buffers. Mm-hmm. They hate them. And they make, not only when the fuzz is engaged, sound terrible, but they...
Even when things are off.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and that is a very common thing that I've learned. And so, like, the one thing I've used for a long time is the Strymon El Capistan. The reason I started using it in the first place is because it was the only delay pedal that could be in line with the old fuzz face and be okay, actually. It wasn't because I've gotten used to it and I'm just used to it and I like it. But it's like, initially it was because it was the only one that would
work with the rest of your rig.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
you've got the Mythos, kind of Klon.
I do. Zach Broyles from Mythos is an old friend. He's got a great name.
Yeah.
I met him years ago. He was one of the OGs at Carter Vintage back in the day. And as I was just relaying to Bob, I have distinct memories of him with his first crop of pedals that he built, and I was fairly rude because I was very anti-pedal at the time, and he was just politely like wanting to show me stuff, and I was like, no, I'm not interested. It's not my. And so I've eaten my words many times over as I've reconnected with him, because that sounds amazing. This is his Wildwood version Mjolnir, which I haven't used an overdrive pedal in 15 years because I just turn the amp up.
Yeah.
I use fuzz all the time, but overdrive, but I use it when I'm playing slide. Especially playing with single coil pickups again. That's really what I use the Mjolnir for, is when I'm playing slide, because it just gives me that extra little bit of
to fatten it up when using especially a
because I never turn the gain much up past 9, which ironically, back when I had a real Klon, back when they were $500 in the early 2000s or whatever, or $400, and it was like, oh, this is obscene.
Yeah,
that was how I would set it then too. So,
what are these other guys?
This right here, I'm really excited about. My friend Aaron, Dominion Fuzz up in Canada. I have searched long for something to use other than my vintage BC109 fuzz face, which has been like my main effect that I've used for several years now. And I have lots of really nice ones that are all really good in different ways, but none of them were quite, I have this one that my buddy Kind Effects down in Florida made me that is really good. That is one I've gone to, but oftentimes gone to that one in particular. And I also have an Isle of Tone one that's really great too. But this is fantastic. And so hold your ears, people in this room. That where the note kind of caves in on itself.
Yes.
It's really, really, really hard to replicate. And Aaron is another gentleman, just like Zach and just like Bob. When you started Visual Sound, he's one guy.
Yeah.
And this is his first he's done like custom builds for people, but this is his first actual I'm releasing this. And it came out 2 days ago and it sold out in 2 minutes. And
it's a good start.
I'm really into that. I mean, it's just small business, good people putting a lot of hard work into something. It's fantastic. And it's germanium and silicon. And I tend to always use the silicon because it's the one that's most stable.
Yeah.
And then this is another Mythos. This is basically his version of a Cobb. Kind of like an Octavia. I like it sort of because it makes obviously it can sound Hendrixy, but I like playing it light like that because to me it sounds more like a horn.
Yeah.
There's a version that'll be on the new record of us playing Coltrane's Afro Blue.
Yes, you can hear that. You can hear the little bit of it. There's a touch of gate, and you can hear the octave. Yeah.
And to me, it sounds more like a reed,
Yeah.
But
how old is this wah?
That's a 70s, and so people are gonna hate me for doing this, but whatever. I want to help you. So the TDK inductor mid 70s, Crybaby wahs, they were made from 73 onward, and now golden era trash can stack of dime inductor Crybabies and Vox wah-wahs are, I never in a million years would have thought that I'd see them going the prices that they're going. It's just outrageous.
Yeah.
And so these were made slightly later. People like to poo-poo them. I've had lots of old wahs, and I think that these are every bit as good.
Yeah.
I bought this one for $65. And I'm sure that the prices are probably going up on them because I think the word is out on them. But get one while you still can, I guess. And it's the big red square inductor that's labeled TDK. And usually the back side of them are labeled Sepulveda.
Yeah.
And they're just great, So for, all that, Leo Nocentelli or was it Craig McMullen who played with Curtis Mayfield and all that. It just really does all that really nice. And then the aforementioned El Capistan, which I love. I've tried to get off it, but I'm so used to the runaway feature that, like, when I'm playing and I create a soundscape, that I can't get off it. And then the beautiful freeze pedal, which is absolutely a la Frizzell, absolutely, where using it to have make landscapes, even in the band context. I like, and then I learned about those things. I don't even know what those are called, that you can control the volume or the control of it with your feet. Yeah. I remember Kenny Vaughan using those 10 years ago and being like, that's nifty.
Yeah. It is kind of a handy way to be able to
control the volume of the loop, as it were. It's not really a loop, it's just grabbing. The thing I like about the freeze, though, is, like, if I want it to be real low, like, I'll chord the way that I want something to, because it'll grab big clusters, and that's the thing that's cool. So it's like that's grabbing that, but I could also, where it'll grab. I like that if you want to get something that's a little bit more dissonant or something that has a little more harmonic complexity, it actually does it. You know, that's one of the things that I think is really cool about that.
The Danocaster.
The Danocaster. It's all your fault.
Yeah, because you've been you kind of did the Kelly thing back in the Don Kelly days and a little bit before that. And then it was kind of like you got more into the Gibson thing, Les Pauls for a while, and then of course you got Red, which still a fantastic guitar that you've played for well over a decade, and then and then just recently you got this. This was Dan Strain's personal guitar. So,
well, like many good things in my life, folks, I was actually having a very deep, long phone conversation with Xact a few weeks ago, and for the last 6 months or so, there's another guitar that I'll talk about here in a minute that sort of started my path into sort of going back to
bolt-on necks,
single coil pickups, that kind of thing. And so I was sort of moving in that direction naturally, and I have a beautiful Echo Park guitar that I've been using a lot as well. That has a Valco pickup here and a gold foil in the neck, and I was really feeling connected to that instrument. But there were certain things about it that I wasn't completely in the deep end with it. I was heading to the deep end, but not there yet. And so, Xact and I were having a conversation about many other things, more important stuff. But we got on guitars for a second, and I just mentioned casually that I was kind of looking for something, and Xact, in a very offhanded nature, was like, you should call Dan Strain, and it was like, that's a great idea, that's an idea. So I called Dan, and said, do you got anything? And of course he said, no, I can barely make them fast enough, which is the truth. And we had a little conversation. I said, well, as you make them, I said, I don't really want you to build me anything because it never really works out in my experience. You sort of have to find something happenstance. Nothing I've ever had made or was made or something like that ever really took. It was always the instruments that sort of fell out of nowhere are the ones that really made the most difference in my life. So as we're having this conversation, he says, well, he says, I've got mine. And of course I'm like, well, I can't. That's I can't take yours. And he's like, well, try it. He's like, there's things about it that are quirky. He's like, it's certainly not for everybody. And he's like, you never know. And he's like, to be honest with you, I have all these great instruments. And he's like, he was sort of talking himself into it as we're having this conversation. So I was working that day. I was over at the Wood Brothers place that day. And so I stopped at his house that night. And, it was just that thing where you pick something up and you're just like, wow, magic guitar. And as a Telecaster goes, it's just kind of, I see now 10 years ago that it was like when I met Adam and our first, bandmate, Frank Swart, it was very important to me to move in a different direction and to do something different than I had done. As a more mature, I should say, man, I recognize now that, I could have just, funneled all that energy into just creativity and artistry. But, for me, I had to, buy new clothes. I had to use a different instrument.
I had to close that chapter and start another one,
right,
in a very
in a very dramatic fashion. And it's absolutely not necessary. But that's what I did nonetheless. And just sitting there at Dan's house, having not played a Telecaster for quite some time, and not owning one for several years now, my hands go right back to how they were for years. And it was just like, this is crazy. Why did I ever not do this? Because it's just so natural, And then I remember, after the fact, it's like, I remember when I got when I got my 335, how long it took me to get used to playing it. And I persevered through it because I was so bullheaded and no, this is what I'm doing. And it's just funny, it's just, the older version of me goes, that's stupid and ridiculous. What's wrong with you? But it was part of the journey, whatever. But it's just take it from me, kids. Just sometimes the path of least resistance is okay. Put it that way.
So this is like an early 60s style telly, but then you've got old pickups on here. So this is a patent number humbucker, from the early 60s, and then you've got a 56, bridge pickup, which is really, because it's just raised D and G, the rest are flat pole. That's my favorite era pickup.
Mine too. And then the steel saddles, which I know is a big
it's
thing
much more dynamic. The brass just, it's, if you need to tame the high end, brass is great, but also it compresses and things that I don't want it to do.
Yeah, no. And these are old pots. And if it's funny because I've only had this thing a few weeks, but gosh, I think I got 500 messages on my Instagram, asking about this, and in particular, people asking about the placement of this pickup.
Yeah, because a lot of guys will install them closer to the heel while this is pushed back more, which is actually helpful.
It's fantastic. It's very balanced. Put some talent on. The in-between position is hellacious. Whose lick is that?
That's Reggie Young and so many others.
Exactly. Only Reggie. But it's very, like, the middle is very Cornell to me. Although I think that's Upchurch, isn't it? Playing on that?
I think it's Upchurch on that.
And then...
Then you're ready for the New York Jazz Telly.
Indeed.
Yes.
Indeed. I've been in a big Cornell stuff phase as of late.
Why wouldn't
and obviously Frizzell and all that kind of stuff. The stuff that's really intriguing to me right now is sort of, as I get more into what I would call fractured playing, which is how I sort of break down a lot of what Frizzell does, which makes sense to me. It's not something that, like, I've heard said or something, but trying to apply slide to that. So, you know, like using chromatics with slide, which to me sounds more like a horn, because, you know, the horn is not, you know, it's not, but you know, it's all fluid, so it's like trying, or like I remember years ago there's a video of Jack Pearson playing No You Needn't, Monk, you know. You know, like, just I'm really enjoying exploring that, you know, element. So,
And I think you're using that old Deluxe Reverb today, an old blackface one.
I'm back, baby. Yes, I've got this. I finally, there's a dear fan named Jim up in Ohio, who is a mutual friend of Audley Freed, who saw a rig rundown that I did with Premier Guitar, and where I talk about my beloved Deluxe Reverb that got stolen in Italy. I've had many Deluxe Reverbs since then. None of them were anywhere close. And he reached out through my agent, of all things. He could have just hit me on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, but through my agent, and said, I got an amp I really want to get to JD. And he ended up sending it here through Audley's longtime guitar tech. And I went and picked it up at Sheryl Crow rehearsals, and it's got a insanely high plate voltage like my old one did, which I think is part of what made it so great. Mm-hmm. This one has a plate voltage that's like, it's like 480, which is like a normal Deluxe Reverb is 420-ish, you know? And it's like 480 is like what 100 watt old Plexi 100 watt Marshalls, you know? So it's like I run it lower voltage, but I do think that that's part of, because it sounds and feels very much, so everything goes in circles. So yes, everything. I'm very...
Go round in circles.
Very, yes. Yeah. Yes. Guys don't got no man today. But I do like different speakers now, though. I've really fallen in love with the Alessandro.
The ceramic one?
The ceramic one sounds amazing. The only reason being is, well, one, I don't have 1,500 Don Kelly gigs to break in another vintage 30.
It takes a long time to get them.
It takes a long time to get a vintage 30 to sound great. But also on a microphone, I'm just getting to where I like older. To me, a vintage 30 can sound more modern if it's not broken in. If it's broken in, it can sound great. But if it's not in that sweet spot. It can sound more modern. And the Alessandro I stumbled upon by accident, really. And to me, under a microphone, it sounds more like an old record when it's under a so.
I think a lot of these instruments you've kind of covered in recent in recent features, but you do have this fun pickup that's on this. So this is again like a Bigsby style pickup that's made by
Eric Galetta in Los
Yeah.
Angeles.
So
And that is it's fantastic. And this guitar has really, I've long looked for sort of the acoustic that was the one,
yeah,
And
Lightning Hopkins.
it's all it took was borrowing Lightning's guitar when we were in Houston. And which is, not far from where you grew up.
Yeah.
I picked this up at Carter Vintage. I went in there looking for a J50, and they had 4, I think, 3 or 4, because that's the beauty of Carter Vintage.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I've decided I want to whatever, and it's like
They got a couple of
they
them.
got pick the good one,
Yeah.
So that one has been really invaluable. Done a lot of stuff with it. And the aforementioned.
This is the Echo Park with your.
No, this one isn't
No.
the Echo Park. This is one that my friend George Bradfute put together. So here, So this is what started the move towards why I'm playing a Telecaster.
Yeah.
So I started playing more and more songs in low tuning, like baritone tuning, essentially. Which I prefer B to B, just for my voice. And I'm not a fan of baritones, essentially. I like bass sixes, which I know you do. But actual baritones feel weird to me most of the time. Not the Jerry Jones I bought from you a long time ago, which I should have kept, by the way. We've discussed that recently. I should have kept. That was a great guitar. Oh. But nonetheless, I digress. So my buddy Joe McMahon, who's a great producer and session guitar player, and he's a really close friend. He has a really cool old Tedesco that he tunes down and has string length back here and things to sort of compensate for the tension. And so I asked him, I was like, man, where'd you get that? And he said, I got this from George Bradfute years ago. And George is a really well-known producer and sort of a tinkerer and sort of a Nashville institution, as it were. He's put lots of very notable instruments in a lot of real famous guys' hands. And he's just a sweetheart of a guy and an amazing musician. And so anyway, I called George, this is several years ago now, and I called George and I said, hey man, I'm looking for something to tune down to B. I don't really know what I'm looking for. And he's a guy that at any given time might have 300 instruments for whatever reason. Yeah. Mandolins, violins, kettle drums. I mean, it's like, it's amazing, like the things that he'll have knocking around his Madison home. And he's like, I got a few things that might work. He's very soft-spoken. And so I go over to his house, and he had several things all set up perfectly, tuned to be, waiting for me. And this was sitting there in its original situation, which was a different pick card, different pickups. But I picked it up, and I went, man, this thing's great. And it didn't go out of tune, and it was just perfect. And this is an old body and like a music craft neck, like Red Volkart used to get off eBay. Mm-hmm. And he refinished it all with hardware store paint from Hillsboro Hardware or wherever. And So I bought it for a ridiculously cheap amount of money, because that's another way that George is. And then over time, I used it more and more and more and more, and it had a set of pickups. It had a couple different sets of pickups in it. And then my buddy Wade Coffer, who is now the head of the repair department at Carter Vintage, who's an amazing guitar player, by the way. He makes his own pickups and rewinds old lap steel pickups and gold foils and stuff like that. And he's really into Rycooter. He's really into all that stuff. So I gave him this and I said, this is one of my favorite instruments. I have a feeling that you can do something really magic to it. And so this is a Valco that he rewound and put in a different, in a different cover. And this is an old gold foil that he rewound. And obviously out of phase on purpose. And then, again, I turn my tone knobs down on most of these. It's got a lot of high-end harmonic. So anyway, it's like I really wanted, like over time, was using this more and more. And in a way was kind of wanting something that was this, but in a standard tune guitar, which is what has now ended up being the Telecaster, which makes sense because this essentially is like a Telecaster pickup.
Yeah.
But I love this instrument, so...
And another of your kind of local Nashville kind of relationships, you're also using Stringjoy strings, and you've been using those for a little while.
Yeah, I switched over the course of the pandemic, and they make the round core pure nickel, so it makes, as I know you've gone deep down that hole, it makes a much bigger difference than people might realize, especially for clean sounds.
Yeah. They tend to have more fundamental. It's interesting. They don't have as much of the boingy brassiness.
There's none of the boing, but there's a lot of... I wish that there wasn't as much of a difference. Yeah. I mean, it's great because now I'm with Stringjoy and it's like I use exactly what I want all the time now. But it's like when I started experimenting over the course of the pandemic, I was... it kind of angered me that I noticed so much of a difference, because it's that thing you don't want to, for something so trivial, I didn't want it to be,
Yeah, because they're harder to
they're more expensive,
they're a little more problematic even to put them on the guitar. It's like you have to bend them off so that they don't come unraveled, and
you got to be careful.
Yeah.
That's another, take it from us. If you're going to try these, we're going to save you $15 here, folks. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
So when you're snipping it, snip it really cleanly and hard, Like not like do it with authority and then like don't pull on it in any way, You want to take it and seat it immediately, because if you pull it in any way, it's going to pull right off and it's going to ruin the string. And it's not a defect. It's how those strings are made.
And it's because it's a round core instead. Right. They started doing a hex core because the hex core holds onto the windings better, but it changes the sound.
Ask Zach.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I call him for when I have the luxury that you don't, in that occasionally I need to know something or feel like I need to know something or want to know something, and I just call him and say,
And
I'm calling to ask Zach.
And I have JD on speed dial. So, yeah. Do they even have that anymore?
I don't think so.
Well, JD, I really appreciate you doing this. Want to thank, of course, Truetone and for allowing, and JD for allowing us to be here and to be in the house of Greece. Yes, which I love. And thank you for talking about Elvis, and thank you for our friendship.
I'm right back at you, man. It's an honor and a privilege.
All right. Bye-bye.